The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for Tuesday, the 19th of January, 2016, are currently trading with gold at $1,087.85 an ounce, silver $14.02 an ounce, Texas crude $29.42 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently sitting at about 375 U.S. currency. Today in history, Wednesday, January 19th, 1977, West Palm Beach reported snow for the first time on record, with snow flurries reaching as far south as Homestead and even the Bahamas. In recent news, the UN is set to set up processing centers in countries near to Central America where people will be allowed to apply for refugee status without having to pay smugglers to take them to the U.S. border. People granted refugee status may be resettled in the United States or other countries. In a recent release, the UN said, quote, "The international community is currently experiencing a flood of migrants from countries in crisis, with the number of forcibly displaced persons in the world now higher than it has been at any time since World War II. Also, according to the United Nations, almost 60 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes by conflict, persecution, general violence, or human rights violations. The global population of displaced people is growing at a faster rate than the general population." Researchers from Durham University have discovered what appears to be a massive canyon system beneath Antarctica's ice. Using satellite data, geologists have mapped out a system of canyons over 1,000 kilometers long, which is over twice the length of the Grand Canyon, with pits that reach up to a kilometer deep. They were located in the Princess Elizabeth Land region on the eastern side of the continent. The Texas Department of Public Safety, or DPS, has confirmed that a highway patrol trooper, Terry Lockridge, 33 years old, was arrested last week on charges of aggravated sexual assault of an underage girl. Mr. Lockridge has been with the DPS since September of 2009. Officials say that the case is still under investigation. The Lone Star Lowdown is currently looking for sponsors, so if your product or service you'd like to advertise with us, feel free to give us a call at 210-363-2257. This has been your Lowdown for January 19th, 2016.
You gonna do? Yeah. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
Okay, howdy. This is Randy Kelton, Rule of Our Radio, on this, the 22nd day of January 2016. And tonight I'm going to start out talking about transformational grammar and the meta model. Last Friday, I went through some linguistic structures. Now, those particular structures were somewhat more arcane and less well-known. I have a bunch more that we're more familiar with: strongmen, red herrings, appeals, various appeals. But first I want to demonstrate why understanding and recognizing these structures can be very, very important in terms of how we deal with other people and understanding how people do what they do. I'm presenting this because it will give you a set of tools to use against these public officials, or more specifically, it will give you a set of tools to keep these public officials from using their tools against you. Last week, I went through a number of linguistic structures, complex equivalences, lost performatives, negative suggestion, modal operators. Well, these are a set of types of usage of terms that tend to pass the conscious aspect. It passes our conscious aspect because we don't know to look at that as a pattern. Primarily what we have to do is name things. I talked about deletion, distortion, and generalization. I'll get into that a little more in this treatment. But we talked about distortion as having problems, but it's also very important because we come up with something that we call a complex equivalent. Now, then I explain what a complex equivalent is. I give you a word. Use a word in a sentence, and that word has a meaning to me. But it's a common word, and generally the kinds of words that are involved in complex equivalence are nominalizations, where I've taken a process and turned it into a noun, like anger. Anger is not a thing. It's not something you can hold in your hand and turn over and look at. Anger is a way of behaving. So I take a way of behaving and I distort it by giving it a name. And that name means something to me. And it means something to you. But these two meanings aren't necessarily the same. And sometimes they can be dramatically different. But then on the other hand, we need these distortions in order to be able to communicate effectively with one another. Life is way too complex for us to try to include every possible potential permutation of facts and ideas in a conversation. So we tend to distort through deletion by giving things names. Well, the sound, it's necessary on the front end, but it can be very problematic on the back end. A distortion, deletion, or generalization in normal speech sounds like ordinary speech, but when you look closer at it, we have to presume a lot of what's said in order to understand someone else. I won't go too deep into transformational grammar, but transformational grammar is kind of a way to understand the difference between surface structure and deep structure. In the surface structure, we use our generalizations and deletions and distortions, and we use terms that the other person will recognize that tend to represent complex ideas so that we can communicate back and forth over complex issues. Well, when someone is in a difficult position, or when we're at odds with another person, or even unable to communicate effectively, then what happens is a lot of our complex equivalences simply don't match. When we use the complex equivalent, it sounds like it matches. And he says this word, and this word has profound meaning to me, and I'm under the delusion that my meaning of the word is the same as his meaning of the word. And that's not always the case. And when we get terms of this nature, we need to be able to recognize them for what they are. We need to have a definition that says that is a distortion, or that is a deletion, or that's a generalization. What has he distorted in order to make up this label? What has he deleted from the surface, from the deep structure, and only left a part of it in the surface structure? What's he not telling me? Well, it's impossible to tell somebody everything. If we tried to tell everything in every sentence, nobody would understand anything, just way too much detail. So we have to use these structures, but we have to use them carefully. And one important thing is to learn how to recognize these structures. Some of you, if you listen to the show a lot, you may have had the opportunity to hear me do something. When I get someone on the air that scares me, someone who is obviously in deep emotional turmoil, I've had people that I was afraid that they were either going to go out and do something really, really stupid to somebody else or do something to themselves. And they call in and ask me to help them find a way to keep from doing what they're doing. And most of the time, they don't realize that's what they're asking me for, because people are under stress. When I get that kind of thing, it terrifies me, frankly. But when I do get it, I shift into the meta model. The meta model is a very specifically linguistic technique. And in the meta model, you have to intuitively understand the difference between surface structure and deep structure. The difference between what is actually said and what meaning that can have that's not being spoken. I have a little treatment, a little introduction to the meta model here from a book called Structures of Magic by Gwyndon Bandelier. Now, this is a book that's written by therapists for therapists, so they sort of speak in those terms. But anyone who wants to be able to handle themselves effectively in the legal arena would be well advised to read this text. You do not need a psychology background in order to make sense of this. I spent a lot of time studying the popular psychological information when I was in my late 20s when I figured out I was really crazy. And all my friends told me I was crazy, but I couldn't hear them because I was too crazy. And then one day I did something that made me realize I was crazy. And I got to digging. So I went through the popular psychology books that were around at the time. And I found a lot of people with a lot of ideas that treated psychology and the living mind as if it was so complex that no living human being could ever understand it. And it was frustrating because I'm trained as an engineer, and engineers, we don't like that kind of stuff. We like details and connecting dots. And then I came across Grinder and Bandelier. These were the first two guys who treated the living mind as if it were consistent and ultimately understandable. And for me, that was incredibly refreshing. And what they produced is absolutely profound. This is their very first book on this subject. What they did is model other therapists who were very good at what they did. In this case, they modeled a guy named Milton Erickson. Milton Erickson was a hypnotherapist. This guy would take you and bring you out. You never know you've been there. He was absolutely the best ever. And they went to Milton and said, "How do you do what you do?" And he essentially said, "Well, I don't know. I just do it." I have a number of books by Milton Erickson. And as much as I appreciate his genius, he sucked at explaining it. His books make no sense at all because he didn't really consciously understand what he was doing. It took somebody outside to look in and watch what he was doing and find patterns in his behavior. And they used those patterns and patterns by Virginia Satir, Fritz Perls, and they used some of the most current treatments of language. And they came up with this underlying structure. They call it the meta model. The meta model we're presenting is a large part inspired by the formal model developed in transformational linguistics, since the transformational model was created to answer questions which are not immediately connected with the way humans change. Not all portions of it are equally useful in creating a meta model for therapy. Thus, we have adapted the model selectively, selecting only the portions relevant for our purposes and arranging them in a system appropriate for objectives and therapies. In this chapter, we'll present the meta model for therapy. Here, our intention is to give you an overall picture of what is available in the meta model and how it works. In the two succeeding chapters, we become specific, showing you in step-by-step format how to apply the meta model. This is a long chapter I'm reading. I'll move my place around, so I lost the right place I needed. I want to talk about surface structures and how the person who is delivering a deletion or a distortion may not know that he's delivering the deletion or distortion. I think this is a section I need. The surface structure itself is a representation of the full linguistic representation from which it is derived, the deep structure. In a case wherein the linguistic process of deletion has occurred, the resulting verbal description, the surface structure, is necessarily missing for the therapist. Am I running out of time again? Who keeps playing that annoying music? Bummer. Okay, I'll continue this when we get back. It's actually not as bad as it sounds so far. You'll like this. Randy Kelton, Grooveball Radio. We'll be right back.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Real Law Radio, and we're talking about the meta model. When you have someone who is highly stressed, the more stressed they are, the more surface structures they use and the less deep structures they give you, because they shift into an emotional mode. And they'll move from one emotional high point to the next, to the next, to the next. And they don't pay attention to the underlying structure of what they're talking about or thinking about, and I'll show what that means. That's important here in a minute. Let me reread this. The surface structure itself is a representation of the full linguistic representation from which it's derived, the deep structure. In the case wherein the linguistic process of deletion has occurred, the resulting verbal description, the surface structure, is necessarily missing for the therapist. This piece may also be missing from the client's conscious model of the world. If the model of the client's experience has pieces missing, it is impoverished. Impoverished models, as we stated before, imply limited options for behavior. As the missing pieces are recovered, the process of change in that person begins. This is why when I get someone who is highly emotional, I shift into the meta model. And in the meta model, it's a very disciplined technique. You pay attention to the prepositions people use, the descriptive words. He really made me mad. He really made me mad is a deletion. I ask, how did he make you mad? Or what did he do to make you mad? I take what they say, and it's important that you take the terms that they use and feed those terms back to them. The term that is a deletion, distortion, or generalization. You take that deleted surface model and you feed it back to them and you ask them for deep structure. He really made me mad. How did he make you mad? The person has an emotional representation of being angry, and he doesn't look objectively at the details of how he got there, because he might have been already angry when he walked in the door, and the person didn't really generate the anger, they just accelerated. So we ask him to go back and re-examine what he just said and give us some of the deep structure that he left out. And then as he feeds me deep structure back, I will take the descriptive terms, feed that descriptive term back to him and ask for more detail about it. It helps the person get out of this self-defeating cycle we tend to get into, where someone does something and it frightens or frustrates us, and we tend to respond with fear and anger. I've said fear. I should have said anger. Anger is the first response to something that frightens us. And as we get angry, things get worse, and our responses, they feed on one another and get worse and worse. We all have aspects of our lives where we wind up getting into an interaction that tends to always lead to the same outcome, and it's a negative outcome. A lot of times when we're in the middle of it, we know where this is going. Papa comes in, had a bad day, sits down at the table and tells Mama to pass the darn gravy. Well, duh. He knows exactly what she's going to do with that gravy, and both of them can predict, or actually can actually write the dialogue for what's going to go on here. He's going to say this, she's going to say that, he's going to say this. How many times have we been through these? Who hasn't been through exactly these kinds of interactions? And when someone initiates one of these, a couple of weeks ago I talked about the rubber ball theory. The rubber ball theory is a tool for the purpose of interrupting you. I present it as a tool for affecting positive change in other people, but that was horse manure. Yeah, it'll do that, but that's really a secondary reason that's just a secondary outcome. The primary purpose of the rubber ball theory is to install in you an internal mental interrupt. I paced a negative experience, and then I attempted to attach a psychological anchor to it. I take a part of that experience, the experience you feel in your insides, and I attach a negative aspect to that, so that when you feel it, instead of just acting on it, it's like you run into this little speed bump and you kind of stumble over it. And you say, whoa, hold on, wait a minute, stop. The whole purpose of the rubber ball theory was to install that mental interrupt. Now you can take one of these automatic repeating cycles and catch yourself inside it. You can interrupt yourself inside the middle of this cycle. Now you can look around and make new decisions. You can do whatever you feel like doing, or you can do something else. You got lots of options. Now, the meta model is one of the best tools for giving you options when you don't have something handy. If someone is generating one of these negative cycles and you don't know what to do, just shift to the meta model. Pay attention to the descriptive terms they use. Feed the descriptive term back to them and ask them for more detail. That will create a really subtle internal mental interrupt. When we run these automatic routines, we say something, we know what the other person's going to say back. I was in court quite a while ago, and I actually had a prosecuting attorney yell at me in court. And I turned to the judge and I said, Your Honor, I think there's something wrong with the prosecutor. Look how red his neck is getting around his collar. I'm afraid he's going to have a heart attack. You might want to call the paramedics or something. Oh, the prosecutor is just blind with fury at that. And the judge the judge and him were obviously buddies, but he got so out of hand, the judge had to land right in the middle of him and backed him up, and all that nonsense stopped. He actually turned and apologized for me for losing his temper, and things went really well after that. They still found me guilty, but it was a lot more fun. But the meta model, whenever someone is stressed or essentially out of control, when they're out of their conscious mind, you can tell it once you learn to look for it. The judges and prosecutors, they get in court and they do the same things over and over. It's just automatic. You go in there and it's a traumatic experience. But for them, they do this 30, 40, 50 times a day. So it's the same thing over and over. When you trip one of them, it can have really profound effect because they're not used to being tripped, at least not the way you do it. They're used to people being angry. They're used to people reacting and responding with anger, frustration, and resistance. They are not used to people treating them as if they are the servants and we are the masters. I use that as what in neurolinguistic programming is called a reframe. I change the frame of reference. We all have sets of skills for handling all sorts of different situations. And when a situation occurs, we have an internal aspect of the mind that pays attention to context. It doesn't pay any attention to the details. That's what the conscious part does. The peripheral awareness and the inner librarian, they pay attention to context. The peripheral awareness looks at all of the surrounding details and feeds them into the librarian. The librarian says, well, in this kind of a circumstance, we normally act from a frustrated state of mind, and it opens your frustrated mental drawer. And you got all the things you can do when you're frustrated. Angry, enamored, beguiled. We have all of these contexts from which we respond. Some of them are wonderful and helpful. Some of them are horrible. And some of them are in the middle. The problem is when one of these are activated, if you are not consciously aware of the limitations of the behaviors you have in that drawer, you don't know what you're doing. We'll be right back.
A Virginia company has brainstormed a new idea to house aging relatives, a prefab cottage that fits in the backyard of a family's home. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back to tell you about a great idea called Granny Pods in a moment.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
For the elderly, moving into a nursing home can be devastating. But now a Virginia company is offering an alternative, compact, high-tech cottages that fit in relatives' backyards. The company, N2 Care, says its Granny Pods are selling like hotcakes. These 280-square-foot cottages have everything a hospital room does: safety rails, lighted flooring, a defibrillator machine, and electronics that monitor vital signs. The pods can cost up to $125,000, and you have to get local zoning approval. But for elderly folks who want to keep family in their lives and still maintain their personal dignity, these prefab homes seem pretty fab to me. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
You're listening to the Logos Radio Network at logosradionetwork.com.
Yeah, I got that one rent.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio, and we're talking about different ways of responding to old situations. Now, all of those internal mental contexts that we have, I like to think of them as behavioral toolboxes. We have ways of behaving that we've learned for different situations. One of the things that get us in trouble, especially in court, is use the wrong toolbox. We're not accustomed to being in court. The judge and the prosecutor are there. It's their job. They do it all the time. So they have a nice big toolbox. But the weakness of their position is they get people coming in who only have, for the most part, one toolbox to use. And that's the one they developed in grade school. First time leaving home, dealing with outside authority. And in grade school, we're told about all these great and wonderful rights we have, but they very clearly demonstrate to us that while you're in this school, don't even think about trying to express one of those, or the whole weight of the system will land right square on your head. So you go into court and you talk, you speak the high-minded rhetoric, but in the back of your mind, you know that if you try to express one of these guys are going to land on you like a ton of bricks. You go into court and you feel like you're standing in front of the principal because that's the only toolbox you got. So the trick is not so much to internally, mentally interrupt the other person, but to internally, mentally interrupt yourself. And once you're interrupted, once you recognize what you're doing, once you realize you're reacting and responding from this very, very limited behavioral set, then you can stop and go look for a different set. And for this purpose, I do a behavioral reframe. I reframe the circumstances. Instead of going in as a sixth grader being sent to the principal, go in as a parent. Go into the principal wanting to know what in the heck are you doing with my kids? When you shift to that frame of reference, you have a whole different toolbox to draw from. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to try to figure it out. You've already got this set of tools in your righteous indignation box. And you can pull from them easily and elegantly. The whole point of what I'm trying to present here in these presentations on linguistics is not really so much about the language, but more about how we can get control of our behavior that prior to this time has been out of our control because it's been out of our conscious awareness, out of that place where we can make conscious directed decisions about it. You just react and respond from a tool.
Tell you one of them when I listen to them because them just a lie me say all too weak. This is a rest. You tell him. This is a rest. For candy rice. This is a rest. For wrong feelings. All these guys lie. Watch them in them three-piece suit with them ties. Come around, no spread them lies. Them kind of guys, they're not wise. That's why we gonna realize. Arrest them, tell them. We not play with them, we are prosecute them. Make them know so we not easy. This is America and we not cheesy. Everybody come and dance, them agree. Them say long time we should arrest them body. Them the wicked man, them a fool weed. Them a light to weed, them a killer them. Because it's arrest for Mr. Bush. Because it's arrest for candy rice. Lessons arrest. Go wrong. Lessons arrest.
Okay, folks, I think I'm back. I had a little glitch there, a little technical issue. Not sure exactly where I went out, but all of this is about giving us a way of interrupting our internal automatic behavior that up to this point has been out of our direct awareness. We want to take those behaviors or those behavioral sets, bring them up into awareness so we can look at them consciously and say we can redirect the inner mind, because we actually program the inner mind from the conscious awareness. We tell it how to do things, and then we give it to it and let it do it. We learn how to walk. Once we learn how to walk, we give it to the inner mind, and the inner mind does all that part for us. We don't have to pay attention to it unless we stumble over something. And then the conscious mind has to take a look at what went wrong and fix the anomaly, and then give it back to that part that handles it. Okay, that's a nice thing to be able to do. Unless you have current circumstances activating old, archaic behavioral sets. The rubber ball theory will give you a tool to do the interrupt, to stumble, cause yourself to mentally stumble, or cause a red flag to pop up and say, hold on here, this guy is trying to get me to dance with him. Once the red flag pops up, and that's all the rubber ball theory is designed to do, now you get to go inside and look for a different behavioral set. And that's why one of the things I want to go to first is a meta model. Because until you get a new behavioral set established, you need a way of elegantly reacting and responding in a way that won't tend to escalate or elevate a situation. So in addressing these linguistic models, the purpose of the linguistic models, they are to give you something that will act as a red flag. They're intended as mental interrupts. When you hear someone creating a straw man, where someone takes a minor point, exaggerates the minor point, then attacks the exaggeration, you recognize the linguistic pattern. When someone uses an argumentum ad hominem, when his argument is really just bad-mouthing as opposed to presenting facts and logical reasoning, then we need these distortions in terms of labels, so that when your inner mind sees these patterns occurring, it can go get this distortion, this label, and it can push it up in your conscious awareness, and your conscious awareness says, bang, he's doing a straw man. Now, we know how to attack a straw man. People aren't used to having someone step in the middle of their straw man, or someone catching them trying to drag a red herring across their track, or using a irrelevant argument. So I want to spend at least the first part of the next 2 or 3 shows talking about some of these more sophisticated legal elements, so that we begin to recognize them when the other side uses them. And in court, they use them all the time, and we'll talk about some of the specific ones they use in court, so that we can begin to interrupt them. Once we begin to recognize these patterns, and we've developed a tool to allow us to access these patterns, we can start building new tool sets. When I go into court now, it's really easy for me to not get angry or frustrated. It used to be a struggle. It's not anymore. Oh, and we're about to go to break, so I'm going to open the phone lines. Our call-in number, 512-646-1984. So if you have a question or comment, give us a call. If you have a comment on topic, give us a call. If there's questions about this you'd like to know more about. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, and I don't know if anybody's really interested in it. So let me know if you want me to spend more time. I'm considering doing a call-in, a conference line, just to talk about these issues. This is the most powerful thing I own, and I want to give it to everybody. This is Randy Kelton, Real Law Radio. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Real Law Radio, and we're going to go to Spencer in, that looks like Washington. WAS. Hello, Spencer.
Hey, Randy, how's it going?
Going good.
So
what do you have for us?
The point that you're bringing up here, it's something I feel I've been doing for a long time. I just haven't necessarily realized until you started bringing these up. And I know people say that all the time, but I feel like I've developed mine throughout the course of my life. I was never growing up. I was never a really tactful person. Always saying things that necessarily didn't need to be said. So I constantly had people saying, think before you talk. Realize the situation and don't say stupid shit. Stupid stuff like that. So I've always taken the extra second to analyze the situation before I speak. Try to understand what the people are saying, what kind of reaction they're trying to get, and what I can do to influence and move the conversation in my favor.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to hear. When this process developed out of a model of the living mind, I put together a model of the living mind from an engineer's perspective. And once I began putting the pieces together, a process kind of emerged from the data, the information. And once I kind of got it structured together, I looked at it. This is the rubber ball theory. I looked at it and I thought, my granddaddy knows how to do that. Everybody knows how to do that. For the most part, what my grandfather didn't know was precisely how he knew. Everybody does it. Everybody's somewhat familiar with it. The problem is we don't have the tool that tells us exactly how it works so that we can use it very consistently. So I'm glad to hear that you recognize this is something everybody does anyway. We just want to get it to where you can do it on a level that's much more subtle, consistently on a level that's out of the direct awareness of most of the people around you. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, well, I'm ultimately calling. You may have some sort of insight here. I've got someone that I unfortunately, keyword unfortunately, have to communicate with rather frequently. And when I communicate with him, or sometimes the lack thereof, I can never understand what he's trying to do. He's someone that I would label as an absolute hothead. Gets upset over everything. And
okay, perfect. This guy will be for you a resource. The people who act out, who stand out the most from the cultural norm, they are a great resource. Once you begin to understand how the rubber ball theory works, how this set of structures work, it's hard to interrupt yourself. We do what we do, and we've been doing what we do all our lives, and it's hard to catch ourselves. We can look back and say, oh, Jiminy Crickets, I screwed that up again. I really shouldn't have done that. I wish I hadn't said that. But that's afterward. Those people who really sting you good, those people whose actions and reactions really stand out, they're a lot easier to catch. So if this guy's a hothead, wonderful. Pull out the meta model. Generally a hothead, he makes these general statements and he categorizes everybody and everything that occurs around him into some very harshly defined structures. When he says, that guy's really a jerk, well, how is he a jerk? What makes him a jerk? And force him out of his distortions to go into that distortion and pull up his definition of what a jerk is. You may be surprised at what he begins to tell you. And he is likely to be even more surprised than you at what comes out of his own mouth when you ask him to more clearly define what he's saying to you. If you don't know how to handle him, just pull out the meta model. And you don't really have to know all the ins and outs of the meta model. It helps. But just listen to a descriptive word he uses, or a word that he uses that when you hear it, you know it's a term of art. You know, here in the legal areas, we talk about a term of art. Person in law is a term of art. Because in normal, ordinary, everyday usage, person means a living, breathing human being. But in law, it has another meaning. And that's where we get into problems with distortions. We hear the word person. He says the word person. We think we're hearing the same thing, but we're not. So you got this guy that is a hothead. They're great. They're wonderful. I love those guys. They are absolutely the easiest. You know, I tell the story about the hearing aid gag I pulled on Judge Hayes in Mansfield. He was a hothead. I knew he was. The guy I was with, he had thrown him in jail 2 or 3 times.
Take off your chicken suit story?
Have you heard that story?
I remember you talking about you went all the way up the chain trying to get everyone to arrest each other and yelling, take off your chicken suit.
Yeah, well, no, this one,
I hear it.
I set him up. I knew he was a hothead. I knew he would act. Yeah. He would act out. So he started a hearing with David, a friend of mine, and I walked up and stood at the bar. You know, everybody generally sits down, but I didn't. I stood at the bar. And he finally looked up and he said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, Your Honor. My name is Randy Kelton, and I have a hearing deficiency." "Well, Mr. Kelton, just what's wrong with your hearing?" So, "Oh, Judge, I was down in Mexico the other day, and I drank too much of that cheap tequila and lost my hearing aid." And the judge is sitting there thinking, who is this jerk? He said, "Well, why are you telling me this?" I said, "Well, Judge, do you have accommodation for the hearing impaired?" "No, Mr. Kelton, I do not." "Well, see, you have a sound system here. Will you turn it up?" "No, I will not." "Well, then will you speak up?" And he did. Told me if I didn't sit down and shut up, that bailiff was throwing me out of the courtroom. So I sat down and shut up. When the hearing was over, I called the bailiff out and asked the bailiff to arrest the judge. And he asked me why, and I told him that he violated 3903 Penal Code in that he denied me full free access to enjoyment right, and did so under color or pretense of his authority. That's a violation of 3903 Penal Code. It's Class A misdemeanor in the state of Texas. And the bailiff said, "Well, Mr. Kelton, what right did he deny you in?" "He denied me in my right to accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act." The bailiff said, "Well, why didn't you tell him about the Americans with Disabilities Act?" Heck, if I'd have done that, he might have turned the sound up. Now Judge Hayes is sitting in there knowing that I walked him right down the primrose path, that I took his big mouth and bad attitude and used it on him. Now I'm going to be filing criminal charges with a grand jury against this judge for doing that stupid behavior. This stuff is so much fun, you won't believe it. And as to your hothead, let me tell you about a hothead friend of mine. I had a friend whose best friend ran off with his wife. And we're sitting in a restaurant, and he's real upset about this, and he's saying he ought to shoot that SOB. And clearly he's trying to get me to try to talk him out of shooting that SOB. So I felt it, and that was my first reaction. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And the second reaction was to not say nothing. I said, that's not a good idea either, because he'll just keep going. So I said, well, what are you going to shoot him with? And that wasn't what he expected to hear. He said, well, I got that pistol. I said, no, man, don't use that pistol. So they can pull that bullet out of Rusty's brain and they can slide it right back down that barrel. I said, don't you have a double-barrel shotgun? He said, yes, I do. So get that double-barrel shotgun. And when he comes around the corner, there by Johnny Pond's house, it's always dark. And you just line that shotgun up above that headlight and squeeze off both barrels and leave his brains dripping off the back of that pickup. And then go home and take a torch and cut open that shotgun. And my wife started kicking me. She says, well, what are you doing? What I was doing was I was taking what he proposed and projecting it beyond the distortion. I was projecting it to its logical ending, which included a mental image of his best friend's brains dripping off the back of the pickup truck. Well, he was busy being a hothead, and he hadn't thought that far in front of him. We never heard one thing about that again. People will interrupt behaviors they've done all their lives to the point that they will literally get amnesia for it. 3 weeks later, we're in the cafe with him, and my wife is asking, you still going to shoot Rusty? And he said, what? Well, you said you was going to shoot Rusty. No, I didn't. And she pressed him, and I'm kicking her, trying to get her to cut it out. And finally he said, oh, yeah, well, I was just popping off. And I have never heard him do that again after that. These kind of interruptions can really be powerful if you do them subtle and trip him up and you don't know you did it. Makes him absolutely wacko. Hang on, about to go to break. Randy Kelton, Wheelwell Radio. Our call-in number, 512-646-1984. We'll be right back.
It's all according to the weather.
says he cares not for the unsightly. These warmongers hum by
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule Law Radio, and we're talking to Spencer in Washington, I believe. Okay, Spence, this guy that you have who is a hothead, how have you been responding to him?
Nearly, now that I think about it, nearly the same way that you have there.
Okay, let me back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
How does he make you feel?
I feel threatened. I'm renting my basement out to him. So he's a tenant in my household, and I ultimately want to evict him. But I am in fear of, my personal safety and my personal possessions if I choose to do that. I have no idea how he's going to respond.
Are you saying that if you interrupt him, you're afraid that he may get violent?
If I ask him to leave, if I try to evict, anything like that, I fear he may get violent, not necessarily towards me, but more so to my property.
Okay. There's another set of tools called therapeutic metaphor. Do you ever talk to this person?
I try to. He tries to.
Okay. What would constitute a solution for you? If you were to imagine a solution, what would constitute a solution? Okay, where I'm going is you take the behavior that's going on and you extend the behavior to a logical negative conclusion, and then what would be a solution to the negative outcome?
My brain is at a block at this point.
Okay, then let me kind of go through this. You got this guy who's a hothead, and you're afraid that if you confront him in any way, that he is likely to damage some of your property. So you look at the steps in the process. You've got someone who is out of control and someone else is trying to get the person under the control. And when the person tries to get him under control, the other person acts out inappropriately. And then something bad happens to that other person for acting out inappropriately. I had this dog, and the dog was a chewer. He just chewed on everything. And I couldn't leave him in the house. So I tried to fix the chewing. I gave him some, put on the edge of the furniture and stuff where he chewed. I put chili peppers, and I think he liked chili peppers because then he ate the wood instead of just chewing it. And finally one day I took him to the pound. He tore up so much stuff that I called the pound, and they come out and got him. And they took him in, and they let me have him back, but while he was in the pound, they neutered him. And the dog never was the same after that. That's a therapeutic metaphor. You take the steps in what's going on with this guy, and you tell him a story about something else, but you pace his behavior. Pace his behavior in terms of a dog. I don't know really what he does, so I wouldn't know how to pace him effectively. But if I could watch him, one of the things is watch his behavior. When he's agitated, he probably moves his hands in a particular way. When you're telling this story, you move your hands in the way that he moves his hands. When you're talking about the dog chewing, you hold your body, you stand the way he stands, move your hands the way he moves his hands. Now you keep his conscious mind busy with this story. Yeah. The inner mind will pace your behavior, and because your behavior paces his behavior, he will link the story to him. The mind does these things. And then you lead him beyond where he's gone to the next expected level, and then leave him with his testicles cut off. You will be surprised how powerful these things can be, especially if he doesn't know what you're doing. You're just telling him a story.
Yeah.
Pace and lead. And then one of the things we do is reality stack. I talked about reality stacking a couple shows ago. I have a sister. My sister's older than me. She was in Chicago. All her kids grew up, moved out. She got bored, went back to school, became a nurse. Now, I didn't tell you I had an older sister in Chicago who became a nurse. I told you each one of these things, and I did an analog mark with my voice. I marked it out like it was important. So you're trying to stack all these pieces together because they sound like they're important. The conscious aspect of the living mind can only hold approximately 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information at once, and it starts losing stuff. And if you can get the mind too bogged down, the conscious mind just stops trying at all. That is used as a conversational induction. The guy walks up aggressively and he says something to you aggressive, and you say, "Hey man, I did not buy the yellow shoes." And then you hold your arm up with a watch on it and look at it and say, "Do you have the time?" And he'll raise his arm up and look at it whether he has a watch on or not. Try that sometimes with somebody with this guy when he's upset and angry. Try that with him once. What happens? Confusion technique. It just screws up everything. But if you deliver a metaphor, use a little analog marking, embellish your story with behaviors that mimic his behavior, but you're delivering the behavior in terms of a dog or a cat or somebody that you know. Somebody else, not him. It's a little harder when you do it with a person because the pace is too close to catch you at it. But a dog, he'll pace the dog's behavior and not make the direct connection. And this gives him an opportunity to have the experience of moving beyond his blustery behavior to an eventual negative outcome with you. And that'll indicate to him that we go past this point, this guy's going to bring some negative consequences back. You can present this to him indirectly without having to threaten him straight up. That sounds a little complex, but I assure you it is much easier than you think. Just make up some BS story and feed him this story. Give him lots of details. The more details you give him that pace his internal behavior, the more powerful and compelling it will be. I'm giving up some of my secrets. You listen to my stories and the stuff I tell on the air, you'll see that I do that kind of thing all the time. I'm trying to pace and lead, but I'm doing it for a positive reason, to give you more resources. Everything I do here is about helping people find new toolboxes with more resources. So it's okay to do them. Besides, it's fun. The story about the judge, that's a metaphor. Well, it actually happened. It actually happened the way I said it did. But it makes a good metaphor. It makes a good story that you can listen to that story and have a vicarious experience. And the more you hear the story, the more comfortable you become with the vicarious experience. These guys, Grinder and Bandelier, have a technique for eliminating phobias. They say, "Okay, who's got a phobia?" And all these people raise their hand and they say, okay. Don't tell me what it is. Because if you tell me what it is, I'll hallucinate and think I know something about it. Do this step, do this step, do this step. And the steps they do is they have them, they set up a situation to where there are three levels of disassociation from the event. Say it's driving across a bridge. You're terrified of driving across a bridge. Could you watch somebody sitting on a bank of a river, watching somebody standing by the side of the road, watching a car drive across the bridge? Could you do that comfortably? And have them just sit down and imagine that they're watching this guy, watching this guy, watching this guy. I have them do that a few times. After 3 or 4 times, they'll get real comfortable with it. Familiarity breeds contempt. And then you have them imagine that they're the guy sitting on the riverbank. They move up one level of disassociation. And now they're watching this guy, watch the guy in the car drive across the road. And have him watch him do that a few times. And then have him move up beside the road and have him move up in the car and phobia goes away. It's a tool. It works. So we're talking about tools and structures that work, and they work outside the conscious aspect. Using metaphors, especially with someone who is excitable, because they are not paying attention. If the guy is this hot-headed, he doesn't pay much attention to direct conscious attention to what other people are doing. It makes him a whole lot easier to work with. He will be an asset for you. He'll be a teaching tool for you. So think about it. What kind of story could you come up to feed him? What is he afraid of? Does he have a criminal history?
He unfortunately does.
Good. You ever ask him about the courts? Is he afraid of them?
No, he's not. He thinks he owns them, knows them, rules them. He knows absolutely nothing about them.
No. If he has a criminal history, he knows a lot about them. And every criminal I know...
Bad side of them. He doesn't know how to use them to his favor.
Right. That's the point. Every criminal I know is terrified of the system. They believe the system is absolutely, totally corrupt and it's going to screw them no matter what. So you might use that. And when I made up this metaphor, I was using the dog catcher as the system. And the neutering him, that was a metaphor for what, once he's out of his environment and they get him in the system, he's a meek little lamb, I guarantee you. He's going to feel neutered. So look at his history. Look at what he's likely to be afraid of. Make up a story to lead him to that fearful spot, but do it from a disassociated perspective. Hang on, about to go to break. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. Our call-in number, 512-646-1984. We'll be right back.
Now.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
Ain't gonna blind me. Don't bore me.
Okay. Hey, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio, and we're talking to Spence in Washington. Well, Spence, that give you any idea? Yes.
Definitely. That surely does.
Yeah. In this, there's absolutely no reason to challenge him. It's better if he thinks you're being real friendly with him. So this avoids any kind of confrontation. Besides, you'll find that once you have in mind where you want to take him and you start telling the story, just trust your inner mind. If your inner mind knows where you want to take him, the story will just construct itself. The one I just made up, it just constructed itself. They're really easy to do. But we all tell stories all the time, so we're good at telling stories. What we're not as good at, or not used to doing, is telling a story for a very specific purpose. Now we do that with children all the time. We tell parables. But we generally tell about the turtle, tortoise, and the hare. Some other people made up. We're not used to making up teaching stories on the fly. But it's part of our culture. It's really easy to do. So, sound like fun?
It doesn't sound like fun, but it sounds enjoyable. It's going to be a headache one way or another. But if it all works out, it will definitely be enjoyable.
Yeah. At least it will give you some different things to do.
Yeah.
And it may not work. It may not be right. The first story, the second story may not be the one that does it. But if you pay attention to him when you're telling the story, you'll be able to tell when your pace and your lead is working. A couple weeks ago, I told about making up a metaphor for a woman who wanted to quit smoking. And I described this woman I had went to school with, big old fat gal with big boobs, big belly, skinny, spindly legs, and she walked like a duck. While I'm telling that to Allison, I'm not describing what Allison looks like now. I'm describing what Allison looked like 20 years ago. And each time I mention one of them, her head nodded. You'll almost always get that when you're doing a good pace. You'll do an analog mark. Big old fat gal, nod. Big boobs, big belly, nod. Skinny, spindly legs. When I said skinny, spindly legs, her eyes dilated. And she just kind of froze. And flat butt and walk like a duck. Now, she didn't expect that because she didn't have a flat butt, but she did walk like a duck. When you walk like a duck, you're going to have skinny, spindly legs and a flat butt. That's just the way it works. It's a physiological thing. So I described precisely what she looked like 20 years ago. And on every one, she marked it with her head. Yes, yes, yes. That's when you know you got a good pace going. Once you get the pace going, then you can lead. It's a lot more fun than you think. It's interesting. And it gives you options. Okay. Does that handle your situation?
What was that?
I just hope next week you don't call me from the hospital.
No, I certainly won't. I mean, if it worst comes to worst, you know, those indirect things I can bring up, ultimately I can bring them up directly and they will stop him dead in the tracks. It will build up his anger to no other, of course, but it will stop him dead in his tracks. And
Wait, hold on. Do you have more than one tenant?
I have one tenant.
Do you know someone else, possibly fictional, that has a tenant that's a problem?
No, I don't. You know what? Yes.
Good. You got somebody you know that's having a problem with a tenant. You might ask him to tell you what the solution for him is. If you describe someone similar to him, except maybe a woman. Because if he's redneck, boisterous, he's going to have likely to have little respect for women. Is he married?
Yes, he is married.
Does his wife, how does he treat her?
He treats her really well. Really, really well. I've heard a few arguments go on, but for the most part, he treats her pretty well.
I'm trying to find a weak spot where you take the wife of your other tenant and turn the wife into him and turn the husband into the wife. And the wife is causing this problem. How would you handle this? This guy's coming to me and I'm afraid. You know, I'm afraid for him. I don't know what to do. He'll tell you how to handle him.
Yeah.
If you do it from a disassociation. Okay. Good luck with it.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy.
You are most welcome. Okay, we are going to go to Scott in Texas. Hello, Scott.
Good evening, Mr. Kelton. How are you?
I am doing well. Did you get the criminal complaint filed?
I didn't file it today. I'm going to go get it Monday morning because I've got to burn off 14 copies, go get it notarized and all that good stuff. But, yeah, it was really good to hear that. I listened to the tape twice today, and it was really good. Only had like 2 little changes to make, and I made those, and it actually looks a whole lot better now, and it flows. And what I was going to say to everybody listening is for me, Randy was like, he's my mentor. And so once he shredded several of the documents that I wrote pathetically, and then steered me in the right direction because he gave me some case law. What I'm basically getting down to is once you kind of write your statement of facts, you're taking all the emotion out. And I guess, and it all kinds of seemed to tie together to some of what you're talking about tonight, too. It's like you're disassociating yourself from emotion and really analyzing it back to a factual basis. And so that helps to help you to drive the narrative that the way you want it to go, like when you're writing a criminal accusation. You just want everything to flow. And it was really interesting because once I did, it started to snap for me as how you weave the law into the conversation to back up what you're saying with the facts and the law to how it reinforces that. So I thought that was just really good for me, and it was huge. It was really huge.
Well, Scott really did well. I was surprised. I sent him an email, want to know who he got to write that for him, because his first ones were so atrocious. But this thing about dispelling the emotion, I asked for a timeline and not a statement of facts. And the reason I don't ask for a statement of facts is exactly what you said. This thing is very emotional. If I ask for a statement of facts, instead of a statement of facts, I'll get an argument. What the person will do is go to the emotional elements, because for people, these are highly emotional and they have strong reactions to it. And they'll move from one strong reaction to the next to the next. And in order to write this down, they have to re-experience the negative emotion. And that is extremely difficult for people. Most of the time when I'd ask for a statement of facts, I wouldn't get anything because it's just too hard for them to do it. I'm about to go to break. I'll pick this up on the other side. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio, our call-in number, 512-646-1984. Give us a call. We'll have the phone lines open all night on any subject. Give us a call. We'll be right back.
Once upon a time, your printer was not a privacy risk, but today's printers are often connected to Wi-Fi networks, making them a treasure trove for hackers. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back with details on the potential spy in your office, next.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Hacking somebody through their printer sounds like an urban legend, but now that printers have hard drives, email capacity, and are connected to the internet, they've become attractive to attackers. Here's an example. Samsung printers sold up until October 2012 had a security flaw that lets hackers send fake faxes, copy sensitive documents, and spy on you or your company by eavesdropping on your Wi-Fi traffic. Yikes! Your best defense is to change the default password, add antivirus and malware protection, and get that printer behind a firewall. If you don't, you could be the next victim. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
Kidding about chemtrails.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio, and we're talking to Scott in Texas. And yes, when I don't ask people for a statement of facts anymore because it's just too emotionally gut-wrenching for people to have to go back through all those negative experiences. So I ask for a timeline, and I present the timeline in the form of a disassociation. I want to step the person one step away from what occurred. I say, don't give me any explanation. Don't tell me why anything happened. Just say, okay, on this date this happened, this date this happened, this date this happened. Don't even fill in all the spaces because all I really need is a timeline. I need to be able to put things in place. When you say they took me to jail, I don't have to ask you 20 questions about how you got to the point that they took you to jail. I can look at the timeline and kind of see how you got there. That way I can keep oriented kind of in the structure of how things work. Well, that's all horse manure. Yeah, it is helpful, but that's not the reason. The reason is I want you to be able to disassociate yourself from the emotional aspect of the experience and get some of this put down on paper. Putting it on paper just seems to take it out of you and put it somewhere else. And then once I have the timeline, then I can go through the timeline and I will ask questions about things that you, for the most part, didn't consider to be important. And generally, the first thing I want to address is due process. I don't want to hear about all of the facts of the arrest. I want to know what happened after the arrest. Did they take you directly to a magistrate? And you say, well, no, they didn't. They what? Holy crap! That you're going to get this claim, you're going to get that claim. This is wrong, that's wrong, this wrong, that wrong. I get to use that to dispel some of the emotion. I get to give you the understanding that there is some remedy. You have remedy available. They don't have all the power. Once we've demonstrated how they're screwing things up, now we come back to the front. And instead of thinking of how badly you were mistreated by them, now you're oriented toward, let's see what else they did wrong. And it makes it a lot easier for you to go in and pull out the relevant information. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah. Basically, it just shifts your whole mindset from feeling defeated to more like, okay, I really understand what's going on now. And this is what they did wrong. This is what they did wrong. This is what they did wrong. And I bought the code book, so I actually started reading it. I recommend everybody in whatever state you're in, just buckle up and go get the doggone code book so you can actually read the remedy that is there. Because I found it in the very first section, Article 1.03, 4, and 5, and there was the remedy, and it's taking that and weaving it into your story that's factual basis without a bunch of emotion, because it just like he was saying, when you put it down on paper, that is probably going to be the hardest thing you really do, because you actually have to put the timeline in, you have to put the actual facts in, and if you can, and what was it, in my opinion, if it's in your opinion, you take it out because it's not really a fact, or reword it so that it becomes a fact. And emotionalist fact, but it is what it is at that point. And that's when you start constructing it all in your head and start really starting to understand what's going on. Does that sound close to what?
Yeah, that's the idea is to do what Glyndon Bandelier does. They have you have the experience from a disassociated perspective. And the further I can disassociate you from the actual events, the easier this is going to be to accomplish, because you go through the experiences from a distance. And then you go through the experiences a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And each time it gets a little easier. There's less emotion attached to it. If you don't have a way to disassociate, what happens is, and you'll hear people call in, and this is what they do. They start telling you about what happened, and as they speak, they get angrier and angrier, or they feel more betrayed and more, whatever feeling they're having, they will amplify it. They feel betrayed, and then they feel more betrayed, and then they feel just horribly depressed because these horrible things are happening. And what's going on there is, after the first time it happened, they told somebody about it, and they felt frustrated, angry, or betrayed, but not terribly so, just kind of the normal flow of things. But they told somebody, and in order for them to understand it, they have to kind of demonstrate the emotions. So they have the emotions. And then the next time they tell it, they tell the story with the memory of already having told it with emotion, and they tend to add a little more to it, and a little more, and a little more. And this is how stories get so warped with the telling, because we're telling with emotion, and each time we tend to add a little more emotion to it until it gets to the point that we just can't even handle it anymore. It makes us nuts to try to go through it. And if you listen to the show, you'll hear people call in that are in this position all the time. And you'll notice, first thing I ask them for is, give me a timeline. Mm-hmm. Oh, they did this. No, don't tell me about it. I don't want to hear about that crap. Just tell me something happened on this day. That's all I need. So I'm doing a disassociation there. I'm trying to back them up from all their experiences of telling the story over and over again. That's the last thing we want them to do, because all they'll do is reinforce it. And I don't want them to reinforce it on the air for everybody to hear, because that'll really reinforce it for them. So we back them off a little bit, disassociate them, give them an opportunity to experience this from a distance, and from the perspective of what did they do wrong, not what did you do wrong. Does that sound like fun, Scott?
Oh, yeah. Like I say, when now that I've kind of got my head rearranged and my whole thought pattern, now let's move into how these courts are doing some of their manipulation, because you said you had like 4 instances you were wanting to kind of go over. And I kind of lost how you were going to phrase it. You probably did too by now. But how are these people able to, we know that they're trying to make us angry or trying to do this and trying to do this. So now that we're getting our minds wrapped around that and we're throwing roadblocks at it, what are some of the 4 instances they're using against us?
Well, the primary thing they use against us is they don't follow due process. The one is they recognize that for the most part, when we walk in there like a 6th grader going to the principal. And they pretty well know how sixth graders respond to the principal. They're angry that they're being singled out for this retribution, but they're terrified of the principals. So they may utter one angry word, but when the principal slams his hand down on the table, all that's gone. And now their little meek mouse says, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me. They know how to deal with that. And they will reinforce that as much as they need to. They want to drain your resolve. So they'll set a court date. And then you're worrying about the court date and you're struggling to get ready for it, and you get down there and they cancel it. So you're up and down. This is called fractionalization. They cause you to have the experience, and then they bring you down from it. And then they bring you back again. They bring you up, and they bring you down. This is a way of putting someone into trance. It's called fractionalization. It's a very specific technique. They use it on you all the time. We'll pick this up on the other side. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. We'll be right back.
Easy.
Well, you know karma is lurking around the corner. You better watch every step you take. And good will follow you.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. And we're talking to Scott in Texas. And they know how people react and respond. Now, I'm not saying that these courts sat down and consciously contrived to mistreat the public in the way they do. I honestly don't believe that is how it works. Because, for the most part, all human beings are basically the same. And we want to be good guys. All of us, at some point, want to think of ourselves as good guys. And I suspect these prosecutors and judges all think of themselves as good guys. They're enforcing the traffic laws, keeping these idiot morons out here from slaughtering each other on the streets. Well, they don't think about Tehran. Tehran doesn't have any traffic signs. They don't have any red lights. They don't have any rules or laws, traffic laws. And there's no more accidents in Tehran than there is statistically anywhere else. So all that stuff about them protecting us is nonsense, but they, for the most part, feel like that's what they're doing. And they get into this routine. We tend to do what works well. If it works well for us, we keep doing it. If it doesn't work for us, we quit doing it. So they do what works well, and this procedure works well with ordinary human beings, considering the position they are for the most part in. So it's our job to interrupt that. And every once in a while, they need to come across somebody who stings them good. And the fact that they are accustomed to people reacting and responding very consistently, it makes our job a whole lot easier. Makes them a lot easier to interrupt. And if we do our job right, we'll interrupt them and they'll have no clues they know we did something, they just don't know what it was. So they don't know how to deal with us. And primarily, when you do the change in position, you do the reframe. You reframe yourself from the defendant to the master of the servant. Now, the defendant is still in there, but first, they are the servants, you are the masters. And they are not to forget it. When you shift to that mindset, it opens a whole different toolbox. You got a lot more things in that one you can do. And you tend to react and respond differently. Anybody who's been a part of a large organization understands the organizational dynamics. If I'm the CEO and I see some guy in the mailroom screwing up, I don't go to the guy in the mailroom. I go to the guy under me who's over the guy, who's over the guy, who's over the guy in the mailroom. And I chew him out about it. Or I tell him, I observe this, you need to go take care of it. And then the guy under me goes to the guy below him. Now he is upset because he's got to deal with this because the boss saw it. And each step down the line, it gets a little hotter. By the time it gets to the guy on the end, he gets a good reaming. Well, everything just about everything works this way. You go to the court as the master. And yes, you have to adjudicate your case as the defendant, but you're also the master. It is your job to police the police. This is a republic. We put the police out there to protect us from our own excesses and our own distraction. And we don't pay our public officials the same courtesy. We owe it to them not to wait till they do something horrendous. Get them something nice and subtle. I went to the Social Security office today, and I had a phone call to make, so I didn't want to sit by everybody else. So I sat in front of one of, they got a bunch of windows there, and had 3 or 4 of them were empty. Nobody working at them, so I sat at one of those. And this security guard came over and said, "You can't sit here." I said, "Sure can, nothing to it." No, this is a appointment window. I said, "Are you kidding me? It's closed." "I know, but you can't sit here. Get lost." He was just beside himself. I had so much fun with him. And he told me I couldn't use the phone. Where is I need to see your rules, regulations, statutes, whatever it is that you base your authority to stop me from using the phone. What is that? You'll have to look in 28 U.S.C. something or other. No. Not in 28 U.S. He said 18 U.S.C. something. No, it can't be an 18. 18's a criminal code, and that doesn't apply. Huh? And then he looked it up, and I read it, and there wasn't anything in there about a phone. I said, "You told me I couldn't use a phone in here, and there's nothing in here about a phone. You understand that you have a pistol on?" "Yes, I do. I'm a security guard." "Well, when you're wearing that pistol, you can't enforce a report to enforce authority you don't expressly have. And in the process, deny me full free access to enjoyment of right. If you do that, that's first-degree felony. You get 20 years to life in prison. Man, you need to go read the code." And I'm just jerking around. I'm having a great time. He has no idea what to do. But this is my job. I'm the master. And this guy does not need to be in there enforcing laws, enforcing restrictions that are improper. And I need to sting him for it. I didn't sting him real hard. I didn't file a complaint against him or make a big ruckus. But I made him really, really uncomfortable. Later, the wife called me, and I'm talking to her. And I look up, and he's standing right next to me. And I said, "Hon, I got to go. This security guard is standing here, and he's going to start hopping up and down any second now." And he looked at me like he was thinking, if I pull out my pistol and shoot this guy, can I get away with it? But we need to do that. We need to be the masters and not the servants. We need to sting them over the minor things. Don't wait till it gets big. I know it seems petty, but it's not. This is our job. This is how we keep the system functioning right. You go into, like you went to court, and this judge actually shouted at you in court. And then you came back with a judicial conduct complaint and a motion to recuse. And now you've prepared a felony criminal charge of tampering with a witness against him.
Yeah.
Well, you want to play hardball, Bubba? We'll introduce you to the deep end of the pool. Now, the likelihood of us getting him prosecuted for that, somewhere between little and none. But we don't care. Because Scott's going to take that to another judge and ask the judge to perform his duty under Article 210, 211 Code of Criminal Procedure, and the judge is going to refuse to do it. Oh, yeah. Shield from prosecution, 3805 Penal Code. And if in the process the judge says anything that you can in any way interpret as a threat, for instance, well, you have to be real careful. If you're not careful, you can get in a lot of trouble doing this. Man, tampering with a witness, obstruction of justice. Just rack them up. These guys they've never read the code. They have no idea how many crimes they're committing. And if a bailiff says it to you, if a bailiff says anything or does anything, especially if he touches you, he's wearing a loaded pistol. And the code says that if he didn't have authority to do that, and he touched you in a way that you did not invite or you did not find comfortable, that's simple assault. And if you committed simple assault while prominently displaying a deadly weapon, that's a second-degree felony. But if he is a public official acting under the color or pretense of official capacity, that's a first-degree felony, 20 to life. Our legislature considered that a very, very big deal. Now, maybe he don't think it's a big deal to push somebody around while he's prominently displaying a deadly weapon. Well, I do. When that security guard approached me, he was wearing a loaded pistol. I took that very serious. So I've been on the sharp end of those things. I got a whole different perspective about them. It ain't like in the movies. Those things do horrible, horrible stuff to human beings. So when you approach me with one of those things, you better be very, very careful. And so you start stacking these charges on them. Every step of you go up brings more heat back down on this low-level judge. We can do this, and you can get to where you enjoy doing it. We need a few people doing that. We need to stop being afraid of these people. They're going to do their worst to you no matter what. They're going to do the worst they can get away with. They're going to charge you with the worst they can. They're going to get the biggest fine they can get from you. Everything's about the money. They want you on probation for as long as possible because probation fees stay in the county. They don't go to the general fund. So they're not going to help you out. So the more you sting them, the more likely you are to get a lesser charge, even get them to drop it just to get rid of you. Hang on, Randy Kelton, Riverville Radio. Our call-in number, 512-646-1984. And we have our fundraiser going on. I think public radio up here in Dallas set up their fundraiser just to interfere with ours. I know they did that. That's how important we think we are. But go to Logos Radio Network. Help us out. We'll be right back.